Your press review this morning, a look at the stories that are making headlines in the local dailies. Do grab yourself a copy of the Standard newspaper, Business Beat, Extra Pull-Out, all your sports news and international news as well covered in the Standard today. Our first conversation this morning, all about police reforms, what we need and want the police service to look like. But are the laws in place facilitating the same? I'm joined this morning by Peter Kiama, who's IMLU Executive Director, and Chris Gitari, ICTJ Head of the Kenyan office. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Thank you for joining us. So we'll begin with you, Chris. And as far as the laws, when we're talking about police reforms, there's a National Police Service Commission Amendment Bill. There's also the National Police Service Amendment Bill. And there are various clauses, there are various things that are stipulated. What are the issues of concern in as far as the laws to facilitate reforms that need to be seen?
Yes, so we, there have been these bills since last year.
Right.
And there has been discussions with various actors, both the Commission, the Ministry and the CIC. But what we are seeing in terms of the key issues arising, when we look at, for example, the National Police Service Bill, Amendment Bill, is some clauses that then allow for police to use lethal force, for example, in protection of property. And though, you have a raft of clauses which we could discuss and agree upon, but when we see such, very interesting types of drafts where you're allowing the police to, for example, use lethal force to protect property, it definitely does raise our concerns. We also are looking at the Service Commission Bill in terms of some of the amendments that are proposed that, on the one hand, require the Commission to basically keep referencing back to the Cabinet Secretary and also to the Inspector General as Inspector General and not as a member of the Commission, and I'll explain that a little later. And therefore you see a whittling down of the Commission's power. And so you have a bill that seeks to undermine a mandate that is stipulated in the Constitution as independent and therefore not needing reference to anybody else, and therefore only as stipulated by the Constitution. So in broad terms, you have some very serious sticking points which in the end may undermine the reform agenda.
The reform agenda, and it's not the first time we're hearing about the issue of power and who's in control and who's in charge. And of course that's an important issue, and what he talks about and brings in the issue of independence, but also that we are not also having this one person with all this power, because then that in itself, in as far as just allowing for room for everybody to operate, does not happen, right?
Yeah, first of all, Sophie, I think it's good to speak to the background behind police reforms and why Kenyans in 2010 passed a constitution that calls for total transformation of the institution of the police.
Right.
Kenyans spoke clearly in 2010 and said we would like to have our police back because the police service had been taken away by the powers that be, by the executive especially, by the presidency. So Kenya said we want our police back because police are there for public safety and security, not to protect the powers that be. They can be protected, but the first duty of the police is to secure the life and property of all of us.
Right.
And therefore, when you look at the amendments that are being proposed, some of those amendments then begin to attack and take away one key institution that Kenyans put in place to ensure that they get their police back. And that key institution is the National Police Service Commission. The National Police Service Commission is a constitutional commission, like several others that we have, that were put in place to safeguard public interest. One, public participation. Two, accountability of institutions to the public. Three, quality service. And of course, number four, we cannot get all those three without getting taking care of the welfare of the police officers. So those four key pillars are supposed to be safeguarded by the National Police Service Commission. So the amendments that Chris is speaking to begin to take away and whittle down the independence of the National Police Service Commission to ensure that we have a professional police service.
Yep.
And that is very worrying.
Mm.
Yeah.
What is the Cabinet Secretary coming in with more powers? What is real danger in as far as the work of the Commission is concerned?
So, firstly, you have a very clear mandate given to the Commission.
Right.
And, the Constitution, and if you look at Article 259, and you look at other provisions of the Constitution that talk about how, this is Article 2.2, how you are supposed to really manage your powers. It's basically, it should be within the bounds of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And therefore, when you have legislations that try to then expound this in a way that then undermines a commission's mandate, that's usually generally a problem.
Yeah.
But I think secondly, in terms of just the effectiveness of it, the Cabinet Secretary, that's essentially the executive.
Right.
Obviously, consultations can be held with the Cabinet Secretary and any other person, but when you then have almost as if the Cabinet Secretary is a specially placed person with whom the Commission should always have a reference, it should be their reference point.
Yeah.
The question becomes, firstly, what is the agenda of the executive, and then secondly, how is it impacting on the Commission's delivery? If the Commission has to keep referring to the Cabinet Secretary when it's carrying out its mandate,
right,
is it being effective, and is it being able therefore to do its own bidding as per the Constitution and as per its own mandate? So you have a situation where a conflict may arise, where the Cabinet Secretary may have his view of issues. His view obviously you have to look at it through the political prism.
Yes.
Knowing he reports to the president, is an appointment.
Yeah.
So, in the end, Kenyans were very clear. They wanted a level of political insulation of issues on police. And in terms of service delivery of police, there is a level of insulation from the politics of the day. And when we look at these bills, we see that we are hurtling back to the old days.
Reversing on those gains that were made. But also one of those issues highlighted the removal of the power of the Commission to investigate criminal wrongdoing by the police. And this coming even after we've witnessed the vetting of senior police officers. Of course, concerning and interesting to have, recently just emerged that some of those that were found unfit are still serving, which begs the question, then what was the point of the vetting exercise in the first place? But if they cannot and do not have the power to investigate, that as well then is a toothless dog, if we may say that.
No, precisely.
Yeah.
We do feel that the Commission, being the oversight body over the National Police Service, should be able to investigate complaints coming from within the police service itself, members of the service, but also should be able to investigate complaints about police conduct coming from civilians. That should be safeguarded. Otherwise, we beat the purpose of having an independent constitutional commission managing the National Police Service. So we do see that as members of Parliament this week discuss these amendments, I think they should be very careful not to destroy the mandate or the power or the ability of the Commission to serve Kenyans in the best way that Kenyans had envisaged under the new Constitution.
Yeah, and also allow me to expound on that a little bit. You see, obviously the Commission does not have a mandate to investigate crime, and I think that has never been in doubt. And putting it in legislation doesn't in the end make sense to me. Why the emphasis? Because it's very clear in terms of operations and investigations who that mandate belongs, and that's an question of operations, and that's the Inspector General's role. And obviously when it comes to prosecution, there's a correlation with the Directorate of Public Prosecution. But when it comes to them investigating complaints, I think that is squarely within the Commission mandate. So when you also start seeing clauses such as that, then not only is it an issue of overkill, but then the question becomes, why the need for such clauses? I mean, they are in the end redundant.
They are redundant, but already if then it wasn't a functional, thing that was happening, it does not harm at all. Isn't that right?
I mean, the laws are clear in terms of who can investigate crime.
Yeah.
And therefore, to then have it in legislation, to my view, is redundant.
It does
and
not, okay.
Yeah, and the commission has a mandate to investigate complaints, and that squarely remains its mandate.
All right, and you mentioned the shoot to kill civilians to protect any property, even when life in itself is not in danger. So we're seeing here property superseding life in as far as you know who is most important or who we are protecting. That's worrying because we've already had quite a number of cases in Kenya, extrajudicial killings, quite a number of issues remain unresolved. But that, again, one of those, you'd wonder what informed that kind of a law?
Before Chris speaks to the law as it is,
yes,
and the proposed amendments, I would like to speak to the statistics.
Yeah.
IMLU has been documenting cases of, fatal shootings by police, use of firearms, and people dying from use of firearms. Between January 2013 and yesterday, we had documented 161 cases. So between January and December 2013, we had 161 cases. And between January this year and yesterday, we had 39 cases. So 200 cases of police killings. People shot dead by the police in different circumstances. But if you look at the breakdown, majority of those who have died out of police bullets are out of 75% are out of police protecting property, not protecting life. And therefore, you need to put this in context. I am very empathetic with Kenyans who face criminal activity on a daily basis, especially in the poorer neighborhoods of our towns and rural areas. So I am not dismissing the fact that Kenyans, the first reaction Kenyans have with regard to somebody being shot dead by police is good riddance. But that good riddance might be you tomorrow, might be me tomorrow. So we're saying, let us not equate life with property. The law already allows the police to use lethal force to protect their life and the life of another Kenyan that is endangered. But we should not attempt to extend that debate to police using firearms to protect property. Life is sacrosanct. Property is not. And therefore, we should not equate the two at all.
Some would argue there would be a thin line because in protecting of property, this person who's threatening to take that property would, of course, sometimes use force. And so then there's a thin line to draw between you doubling up their protecting property and life as well, because then this person poses a danger to this police officer as they try to steal, rob, whatever it is.
Let me give you examples. We, as IMLU, we deal with cases on a daily basis of people shot dead or seriously injured by police using firearms. We have cases from Kasarani police station of young men being shot dead for stealing a phone. They didn't have a gun, they didn't have a knife.
Okay.
They stole a phone worth 3,000 shillings, they were shot dead, point blank, on the head. How do you justify that? That you kill me for snatching a phone worth 3,000? I'm not justifying theft, and I'm not protecting the criminals.
It's the
but I am saying
force.
We have to be very careful when we allow lethal use of force to protect a mobile phone or a cow. You have to be very, very careful. Because I did see a discussion in Parliament this week in the second reading of the bill of a member of Parliament saying, yes, we have to use the lethal force to protect cows or livestock. I think we have to be very careful about that. It's quite dicey there. But I do agree with the law allowing the police to use lethal force to protect life. Because that is protected under the Constitution, and I think it's clear that we do need to protect life.
All right.
Yeah, so when you also look at the Commission of Inquiry to Post-Election Violence, and you look at just the basic statistics, and remember, CPEV did not really, exist for such a long time, for 5-6 months. But even in that period, and the number of cases they were able to look into, you have 1,100 dead, and out of that you have a whooping 40% killed by gunshots. And so you have a situation where the police, they are said to have contributed, if you look at the gunshot wounds, that 40% of the violence of the deaths, during post-election violence. And if you look at the people who reported to hospitals with gunshot wounds, you're talking about, around about 550. So, very easily within, 59 days of protests and violence, you have almost 1,000 people, either down or maimed by gunshot. And that is incredible.
Yeah.
If you look at, those 550 people where they are right now, those are the people who reported. And then you then say you want to give this group of actors firearms in terms of protecting property. I think we really have to question that kind of policy and what drives it. And I think it's very sinister in my view. And so we have to take a step back and look at the Constitution, as Peter says, in terms of Article 26, which is very clear in terms of the right to life and when can that be taken away. And obviously only when your own life is threatened. And that doesn't come out very clearly. And let me just go back to the CPEV report and say that even in that situation of 400 plus dead and 500 plus injured, there has been no investigation and no accountability around those particular incidences. On those that Peter talks about and those that IMLU has looked into for a long period of time, there's just been reluctance or a policy to not to investigate and to hold to account officers who use lethal force, and therefore to then introduce such amendments. It begs the question, are we trying to ratify our bad habits as exists?
Okay, and there's of course a question of requiring the Commission to develop the criteria and the regulations, and as far as the vetting of officers is concerned, this happening in consultation with the Cabinet Secretary. We saw and witnessed the vetting, which will continue. First, if you would speak to and address the issue of still having officers in office even after they've been found unfit, and secondly, in as far as the exercise has been conducted so far, is that the way it should work? Because we saw everybody that was found unfit appealed, found fit. So questions as to the exercise, not that they should have remained that way. Of course, there's that room for appeal. But is it an exercise that's bearing fruit, in your opinion?
I think I've been on the show before, and I'll still repeat what I said earlier, 1 month ago, that I commend the National Police Service Commission for having commenced the vetting process.
Right.
Because this process has had a lot of difficulties, out of opposition from many angles, especially from those who feel that by cleaning up the police service, that process would deliver the service to the people and take it away from those who have been holding the police service hostage. Now, this vetting process is going to unearth a lot of ills that have, prevented the police from being effective. And therefore, I do commend the Commission for starting the process. However, we do need to, now that we have done the first round, we do need to look into where to improve. And one of the areas to improve the process is enhancing public participation. Which
they did improve on. I spoke to the chair of the NPSC. They did increase the time. So in terms of public participation, that they have addressed.
And we're happy about that. In terms of the officers who have resigned, who have said, I'm opting out of the vetting process, they should be at home. They should not be in office.
Right.
They wrote a letter to the Commission saying, I opt out, and therefore I'm leaving the service. Opting out of the vetting basically has implications, and the major implication is you are actually opting out of the National Police Service.
Okay.
For those who failed the test, the regulations, the vetting regulations that were gazetted by the Commission indicate that immediately you are found unfit, you leave the office and you can appeal. So and I think it's clear, and the office to implement that or to enforce that particular regulation is the Office of the Inspector General.
Right.
So do we expect compliance in good faith?
All right.
Yeah, I mean, there are those who probably have a review or appeal pending, and them being in office, for me in terms of due process, it's still all right to the extent that they have appealed and that's on record, and therefore that is pending and needs to be disposed of by the review board. And so in that regard, that's all right. But when you have a situation where the commission has taken a position, the expectation is that the Inspector General and the two DIGs should forthwith ensure that those persons are removed from office, those who have not, appealed, or those who have opted out. And I think that there's clarity around that. Let me speak to public engagement.
Right.
You see, adding time to the process, in my view, is just part of the public engagement. There should be a robustness in their engagement. There needs to be clarity to the public in terms of what is this process, where is it going, what is the expectation on me as a member of the public, and to whom does the responsibility lie for me to engage with. And so in the end, we still request the Commission to be to up its ante, to be more robust in its engagement,
right,
and especially not only within public domain. These police spaces, the police themselves are part and parcel of this. They should be able to engage with the Commission more robustly. We have people in various institutions. You have, prisons, for example. Prisoners have not been brought into this process. They would have a view. You have victims as their own set of issues, having their own set of issues. And of course the media. So you have various subsets within which we have requested and will request the Commission to be more keen and ensure much more robustness and engagement. So you have not only communication one way, but a two-way communication.
Okay. So finally, in as far as the reforms, that's the biggest bottom line in this conversation. People want to see that the service works in the manner in which it is supposed to. Your concerns, raising concerns over these amendments and changes, proposed changes to the law. What is your appeal to the various stakeholders in as far as police reforms are concerned to ensure that the gains are not reversed, but at the same time, the pace is not too slow, and that we are actually making progress and achieving something? Very briefly, sir.
My appeal, and I would like to speak directly to the members of Parliament, because they're the ones now with the amendments in the House.
Right.
I'd like to appeal to them to completely do away with Article 54. Allowing police to use clause 54, allowing police to use lethal force to protect property. That is going to take us back many years.
Okay.
Number two, to ensure that they remove all amendments that are an assault to the independence of the National Police Service Commission. Those two, for me, and I think for all Kenyans, are critical. That we safeguard that national institution, the constitutional institution, the National Police Service Commission.
All right.
And lastly, for me, is to appeal vetting, and these amendments are only these amendments are a distraction to the reform process. I would also look forward to seeing the Inspector General as an independent constitutional office beginning to engage Kenyans on his agenda on comprehensive reforms of the National Police Service.
Okay, finally, sir.
I'll just speak, from that perspective. One, the Inspector General's plans for reforms are unclear, and I think there needs to be clarity around that. I think, secondly, the reform agenda needs to be transparent and accountable. Thirdly, the way in which he comes up with this reform agenda needs to be consultative, and I think there should be, at least serious engagement around that level. And lastly, the persons who drive this agenda need to be persons who are, who are trusted by the public and whom the public feel can drive the process. So he has to therefore ask himself all these questions, as we go forward. So, just speaking now from what Peter says, I think that's what we propose. That was what we propose.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being part of our show this morning. Peter Kiama, IMLU Executive Director, and Chris Gitari, ICTJ, Head of the Kenyan office. We are glad you're watching Morning Express. It is 7:16 a.m. We're just taking a short break. When we return, it is 57 years since Dedan Kimathi was hanged at Kemitu Prison. Today, it's a commemoration of his life, his legacy, but we're also looking at activism, modern-day Kenya. What are those things that we can do and various other Kenyans can do to ensure that the leadership is kept in check and that the country moves in the direction it should be moving, and that Kenya, the dreams and aspirations of the people of Kenya, as we celebrate Kenya at 50, are not forgotten, are not trodden upon, and are not reversed. Stay with us right here on KTN.